She boarded that plane like any other passenger, calm, composed, and carrying the weight of years of hard work that had earned her success. But within minutes, what should have been an ordinary flight turned into a public humiliation. Pulled aside, singled out, and stripped of her dignity, not because of what she carried, but because of who she was. A decision made in seconds would ignite consequences no one saw coming. What happens when power and prejudice collide at 30,000 feet? And how does one act of racism ripple into a billion-dollar reckoning? She was not just another passenger. She was a woman who had built her empire from the ground up, a CEO whose influence reached across industries, and whose reputation was built on resilience. For years, she had fought against every obstacle, poverty, discrimination, and doubt, turning each challenge into fuel for her success. That morning, she arrived at the airport like anyone else, dressed in quiet elegance, her boarding pass in hand, and her mind focused on an upcoming meeting that could shape the future of her company. The terminal was busy, filled with the usual chaos of travel. Families rushed with bags, flight attendants moved swiftly, and announcements echoed through the air. To most, it was just another day. To her, it was a brief pause before another milestone. She had learned to keep her head high, to walk with the calm assurance of someone who had earned her place in every room she entered. But airports carry their own silent tensions. To some, she was not a CEO, not a leader, not a woman who commanded respect. She was simply a face they chose to see differently. She did not know it yet, but the quiet prejudice that lingered in the background of her life was about to step forward, right into the spotlight. The plane she boarded was meant to carry her to a meeting of opportunity, but instead, it would carry her into a storm that would test not only her strength, but the very limits of what injustice could cost. The boarding process seemed ordinary at first. She scanned her pass, greeted the attendant with a polite smile, and made her way down the narrow jet bridge. The hum of engines filled the air, passengers shuffled behind her, and she slipped into her seat with the calm precision of someone used to traveling constantly. To her, this was routine. To the crew watching her, it became something else entirely. It began with a look. A flight attendant's gaze that lingered too long, followed by a quiet whisper to another. Then came the uneasy shifting, the way staff glanced at her row and avoided her eyes. She ignored it at first. Years of experience had taught her not to overreact. But unease grew when two uniformed security officers appeared at the cabin door, their presence impossible to miss. The announcement was brief, delivered in clipped professional tones. A concern had been raised, and she needed to step off the plane. Confused, she asked why, but no reason was offered. Passengers turned in their seats, some whispering, others staring openly, as if waiting for confirmation of the unspoken accusation. Cameras came out. A stranger's phone tilted upward, recording her humiliation in real time. Her chest tightened as she stood. Every step toward the exit felt like walking through a tunnel of judgment, her dignity stripped away with each passing second. She knew what this was. Not a safety protocol, not an error, but a decision rooted in bias. A woman of her skin color, in her position of power, had been reduced to a spectacle before an audience of strangers. On the jet bridge, the questions cut sharper than the stares. Security demanded her identification, probing into her travel purpose, her seat assignment, even the legitimacy of her ticket. Each word carried the unspoken weight of disbelief, as if her success could not possibly belong to her. She explained calmly, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Yet the suspicion lingered, their eyes searching for something that did not exist. Passengers shuffled past, avoiding her gaze, their silence louder than words. The flight departed without her. Standing there, left behind in the echo of humiliation, she felt the sting of being both invisible and exposed at once. But what no one knew, not the passengers, not the staff, not even the airline itself, was that this moment of injustice would not end here. It was only the beginning of a reckoning that would shake the very foundation of the company that cast her aside. The humiliation had already cut deep, but the true blow came when she realized the story had escaped her control. By the time she returned to the terminal, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Strangers had uploaded clips of her being escorted off the plane. Millions of eyes now watched her shame on glowing screens, comments flooding with judgment, assumptions, and cruelty. To many, she was no longer a respected CEO. She was reduced to a headline, a stereotype, a spectacle of suspicion. She sat alone at the gate, her body trembling with anger. Years of restraint, of carrying herself with dignity in spaces that never wanted her there, now felt like chains. She had played by the rules, worked harder than most, proven herself over and over, and still, it was not enough. A billion-dollar empire in her hands, yet in that moment, she was treated as if she did not belong at all. Tears blurred her vision, not of weakness, but of fury. She thought of every time she had been told to wait her turn, to lower her voice, to prove her worth twice over. And here, before the world's gaze, it all crystallized into one undeniable truth. They did not see her success, they only saw her skin. Her heart pounded, but beneath the humiliation burned something sharper, a resolve that this moment would not define her, but them. What they had intended as an act of control would become the very spark of their downfall. The question was no longer whether she would respond, but how devastating that response would be. She could have stayed silent, swallowed the pain, and moved on, as so many before her had been forced to do. But instead, she chose a different path. Within days, her legal team delivered notices, her voice broke through headlines, and her influence struck where it hurt most, the company's future. The same airline that had dismissed her dignity now faced the loss of billions in funding, deals collapsing as investors recoiled. What they thought would fade into another quiet story of humiliation instead became a storm that shook their foundation. For her, the victory was not in revenge, but in reclaiming the power they tried to strip away. She stood as proof that silence is not the only option, that dignity can fight back when backed by courage and conviction. Yet even as she walked away with her head high, the weight of the experience lingered, because she knew the truth. This was not just her story. It was the story of countless others, without her platform, without her wealth, without the ability to fight back. Every viral clip, every whispered judgment, every moment of humiliation carried a message larger than one woman's battle. It was a mirror held to society, forcing us to confront the prejudice that too often hides behind uniforms and polite language. So the question remains, not just for airlines, not just for corporations, but for all of us. How many more lives must be torn open by racism before change is no longer optional? How many more stories must echo before justice is not the exception but the rule? In